this mic is working. Oh, it is.
It is.
Very nice. Okay, I would like to welcome onto the stage, our little stage here, the director of the film, Gianni Manno. And also David Sandström from The Refused. Also Johannes Persson from Samtalet. Okay, let's sit down and scoot together. We're gonna have a oh no, this does not work. We're gonna have a conversation for about 20 minutes, and then you're free to ask as many questions as you want. You can ask anything you ever wanted to know about anything concerning Umeå hardcore, and I hope we will be able to answer your questions. Okay, my name is Ika Johannesson. I'm a culture journalist, and I'm also, as Dennis mentioned, I'm a metalhead to begin with. I was not a part of the the hardcore scene in the 90s, well, a tiny bit, but I got into it later. And I would like to talk to you first, Gianni. You're from France, yes?
Yes.
And what made you make a documentary about the Umeå hardcore scene?
That's the question I asked myself sometimes. Why Umeå? Because Umeå, because all those bands I've listened to during my childhood and since now.
Can I ask how old you are?
37.
That means that in 95 you were like in the middle of the 90s.
And I was very, very young, so I discovered the Umeå scene way later. But first I was passionate of punk bands, French punk bands, and also a lot of things, mainstream things. But the last 20 years I was very curious about hardcore in general, and when you listen a lot of hardcore bands, you just see that a lot of those bands came from Umeå. So it was very known that Umeå was the place to be for hardcore bands and also straight edge. So why Umeå? Because first I was with two friends, Romain and Theo. We were three, very curious, and we wanted to spend some sort of holidays in Umeå. It was in 2014, the year of Umeå, European Capital for Culture, and we thought that it was the good time to meet pioneers and people around in Umeå. So at first it was not a film or documentary project. It was just a sort of road trip because of our curiosity. So. And at the end, it ends with the film.
But how did you decide to make it into a film?
Because this documentary was a meeting of who we met in Umeå, what kind of band we listened to, and we met up there. And
who did you meet on your first trip?
On our first trip, we first met José Saxlund. That was the beginning. It was very fun because we lived to Umeå. First, we made a transit in Stockholm, and we just get just one number, the José number, and we arrived. We meet him. We made the interview. It's very DIY, so we made that 20 meters just in front of his office, and at the end he said, "Oh, I think Johannes came from a tour. Maybe he's here today." So I have his phone number, so I can give you his phone number. So we said, "Did you have some other phone number?" And give us Dennis' phone number.
Everyone has Dennis' phone number.
Yeah, I know that, but at that time I hadn't Dennis' phone number. And he gave us maybe David mail, But at that time David wasn't around there, so it began with Jose, and then we arrive in Umeå. We go straight to Verket to find people curious of our curiosity, and we met Victor from Licatil, and Robin, and party goes on.
But so you made the entire interview part of the film in like 2 days?
Something like that. And we were something like 5 days in Umeå, and we made the major part of the interview the 3 first days. Then we made a little getting around to see stuff, and Dennis doesn't answer us, so we said we couldn't leave Umeå without meeting Dennis, and just the day before we left, he answered and said, "So meet us at that bar." It was very loudy, and I think it's we can see it on the documentary. We were in a cafe, and so that's fun. For answer your question, what was the point? At what point we decided to make a documentary? It's when we opened the archives. We see how much archives are in the Umeå archives, and I just seen 2 cassettes, and I said, okay, there is something like 50, 60, 100, I don't know how many cassettes. So there's a big material for that. And I haven't seen all because I was in Paris and I was watching videos by internet via Skype. It was DIY.
Yeah. David, as I understand, you were one of the main archivists of the scene. Why is that?
I'm not sure. It's not. I don't keep a lot of stuff, but I loved the early Umeå hardcore stuff. And I was a metal guy. I was playing in other bands, but I saw Step Forward when I was like 14, and Step Forward was the band that Dennis had before we formed Refused, and they were an amazing band. Like, I didn't realize at the time. I had no idea. I didn't even understand that why I liked them was because I liked hardcore, because I hadn't heard hardcore, I just heard them. And hardcore punk was like this primitive, like very fast but very simplistic, just this conduit for information in a sense. This incredibly powerful thing that to me seemed like the way that people talk about like the blues or something, like this is the truth, this is great. And I was playing complicated music, I was a music school guy in a certain sense, and I just loved this band, great players and stuff, and I just realized like whenever they played I had to film them. My dad he's a technical, like a nerd, so he had a camera, so I would just go and film them, and then I'd film anyone who played with them. And then as that band broke up and we formed Refused, I would keep just filming it all, because it seemed to me somehow that, oh sorry, it seemed to me that somehow it was important. Yeah.
But then you kept it all.
Yeah.
Did you have the feeling that it was, as you say, it had importance? And
well,
why
first
did
it
you
just
think
seemed important
it did?
because that band was good.
Yeah.
Then it seemed important because there was so many people suddenly involved. So the archive that I had, there wasn't a lot of Refused stuff in it. It was just all the other bands. Because when Refused were playing, I was on stage. So I would record everything else and I would keep everything else. Like someone broke a guitar on stage, I would keep the guitar for some reason. Because at a certain point there were so many people in such a small town. And it just seemed like this is affecting a lot of people. This is a lot, this is significant in some sense. So I just kept it. I just kept it for no reason. I just kept it for a long time. And then Susanne and Karin arrived from the museum, and they were like, "Oh, you have all this stuff. Can we have it?" I was like, "Yes, absolutely. Take everything." So I don't have a single thing. Nothing.
Nice.
Like not a photograph, not a VHS tape, not a T-shirt. Nothing. It's all in there. It's excellent.
You were saying, Gianni, you went up north with the question, why Umeå? And I want to pass the question to Johannes and David. Why Umeå? Why did this happen in Umeå? Dennis is talking about, you know, towns up north, nothing happening, you needed to do something by yourself. But there's a lot of towns in Sweden where nothing's happening and you need to do it by yourself. But why Umeå and why right then? Johannes, you want to begin, or David?
Yeah, I think David is probably.
Okay. Yes.
I think partly Umeå is a very strange place. Umeå is the only town in what is Norrland, like 60% of the country as far as area is Norrland, and it's the only, I think around early 70s, it was the only town that kept growing. Every town, every small township or whatever, they all kept, they just ceased to grow. And Sweden, because Umeå, partly because it got the university in '65, just kept growing. But there was also this, it's complicated, but Umeå had never been able to, this is so boring.
Is it boring, you think?
No, but
No, exactly.
Umeå had never competed with, a lot of those cities that had a very clear identity, like Skellefteå and Luleå were industrial towns and stuff like that. And there was a lot of administration and some of the other, whatever. Umeå was not really competing, so it became sort of an arena for a lot of like liberal politics. And the head of that was like the Västerbottens-Kuriren. So there was this idea, it was never like a social democratic, like a really successful, like the politics of social democracy were never huge there. It was a bit more of a bourgeois town, and it was a lot more individualistic in a lot of senses. And then there was like I don't know, but it was a counter reaction to that in the grassroots. So like in the 50s and 60s, basically exactly what happened in the hardcore scene in the 90s happened in the jazz scene. These young kids really into jazz, really, you know, like excited about what's going on 42nd Street or whatever. They start playing, you know, they start affecting the culture, you know, like some kids who were teenagers in that jazz scene wrote for like big artists in Sweden and stuff like that. Doris, did you give the world some love today? It was a dude from in Umeå. Like classic shit. And then they started this jazz festival where they brought like Duke Ellington, Sun Ra, Sarah Vaughan, you know, all these people. So it was basically the exact same thing that happened in the 90s had already happened once. And it was
How
sort of
aware were you guys of that when you grew up?
Not at all. Not anything, because both me and Dennis were like working class dudes. Like our parents were into like motorsports. We had no clue. It was an act of rebellion of some sort, I suppose. But I think that Umeå was the kind of city where, imagine like we started talking about like veganism, like all this shit, playing this like aggressive, crazy music. No one ever said anything against us. Like no one, like the local papers, everyone was just on our team. And it's kind of interesting that it wasn't like it was like we're fighting against, you know, whatever. Like there was no, because they were just like, well, the children of these people, a lot of them were children of academics, not specifically me or Dennis who started our band, but it was just like these children need something to do, you know. And if this city's gonna keep growing, there was this vision of let's make it to 200,000 or whatever. Like they need some space. Let's give them some space. There was a lot of support from not specifically the social democratic majority, but as far as like the blue paper and stuff like that, they were very much on our side.
Until somebody blew up 3 trucks.
And then, yeah. But
So
still,
Johannes, how did you experience Like, what do you think happened in Umeå?
Like, I don't know, I think Umeå was just like a perfect storm of it. I mean, everything that David said is probably parameters of the whole thing. But I also think that Umeå was a perfect storm of people. I mean, this is a very, very boring word, but like bunch of entrepreneurs, people that did stuff, with kind of made other people understand that just by not waiting, just doing stuff will get you to tour in Europe and the US. I think for me it's as simple as that. And also, I think one factor, I mean, when it comes, I can just look at myself, is the birth of like new media in the beginning of the 90s. And how some people just decided to blow up some trucks, and how that totally exploded.
What do you mean, new media?
Well, I mean, we only had 2 channels in Sweden up until like the beginning of the 90s. And okay, I can speak of personal experience. I know that for me it has always been interesting to see how, I mean, everybody kind of nobody has been publicly positive about this blowing up 3 trucks at the Skåne area in '94, but that made the media interested about something that's happening here, which kind of, started some kind of spiral. Like, I have a personal experience of people at production companies literally asking me to make things happen when they're in town, because media
Make things happen?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Like I cannot condone any violence, but it would be good if something happened. A couple of
So they approach you when you were a teenager? Make something happen when o.s.v is in town.
Television,
Yes. Well, obviously in the movie it kind of looks like you did have something to do with it.
I didn't. And when I told him no,
But Johannes, we all knew them.
Sure.
Yeah, we all knew. I mean, when Dennis on the when he says like,
It's like, I have no idea who did it.
no. Yeah, we all
knew.
knew.
Everybody knew, and that line in that review song that he's trying to explain, we put it there to give them something. It's like, let's go. You know, it's just like. But they were crazy people.
Yeah,
I mean, they were not.
No. They were like the most of the people behind it, like not everybody, but most of them were loose cannons. That came from I mean, watching a bunch of these faces that people that were very close friends of mine. It's not all that positive, because I know that from that point things did not turn out that well for most of them.
It seldom does for loose cannons within, because there are always loose cannons within every subculture.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, of
but
course.
it manifests in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, they were very close friends of mine. You know, if you when you really drag the pendulum very high, when you drop it, it's gonna go through the roof on the other side. So, I mean, sorry to destroy it.
We brought one of those guys. Because
Guys?
this was a guy.
Yeah.
And they were, anyway, because we were playing with Art Crisis somewhere in Europe, and we were just like, let's just bring him and he can talk to them, and then maybe, because we just figured they'd be reasonable people at the end of the day. So we bring him, and just so that he would, I don't know if we cared if he stopped blowing up shit or not, but just like, just don't be so stupid. And then he meets Carl, and then Carl is just like, I'm sitting there, and he's just telling him like, if someone steals, cut off their hand. And we're just like, abort. No, it's getting worse.
But as you said, Johannes, like the media really turned their eyes toward.
I mean,
So there must be a kind of, an ambivalent perspective on these happenings, right? Within the scene. Am I right? Or
I
what?
don't know. For us, we had a conversation where it was just like, let's just say that we don't know them, and let's just keep our message the same. And it was sort of like this kind of thing where they will be the crazy people and then we be the sane people, which, you know, is a decent political strategy, I think. Like, it's whatever, like what Malcolm X and the Panthers meant for Martin Luther King. He was like the reasonable, you know, like it made him seem like great that there were these crazy people, you know, shooting people. So for us, it was just like, let's just say we don't know them, and let's just let's stay on message.
I mean, there's no doubt that, I mean, at that point, and still, I don't condone that kind of behavior. But there's no doubt that that kind of actions brought the attention to the national media and the international media. I remember MTV going and making this piece of
So bizarre.
Yeah, I might have been there. Or
So bizarre. I mean, honestly, bunch of teenagers shouting about shit. Suddenly, I mean, really, there was actually a case of like, someone wrote like a thesis on like press ethics based on one of like, the strange like reports that one of the big papers. I'm sorry, we're crowding you. We're not really talking about the film. Yeah, no, but
Go on.
it got out of hand. It was really weird how it, in the big, you know, newspapers, like the way that they treated it. And I think they didn't quite understand what it was. They didn't understand what they were getting into, and they really, like, they would be waiting at home, you know,
At people's houses.
Yeah, when they got home from school or whatever, just like getting. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like,
it's really weird growing up as a teenager and just expecting the city police to tap on their phone. I mean, it was like you grow up, everything is possible.
but that's their job.
Yes.
Because we made people blow shit up.
Yeah.
That's
You accept responsibility?
Yeah. No, but I mean, partly, but it was also Earth crisis.
But let's talk about the politics of the scene, because I'm from Gothenburg, very far from Umeå. I was not into the hardcore scene at the time. As Dennis says at the end, like, yeah, everyone from the outside thought it was so very serious. We did. We were like, oh, these boring hardcore straight edge types of the North. That's what we metalheads in Gothenburg was thinking. And what I wonder is, because you portray very nicely in your movie the positive sides, the community thing, the entire thing. What I want to know, I'm going to come back to you after this, is were there any negative sides to the political side of it? Were there any, did you feel, and was there pressure?
Oh.
Yes, can you please tell me how it was?
Looking back at it, I mean, I got into, I'm a all or nothing
I
kind of person.
Neither me nor Johannes is the best person to talk about this, because we were, I think, if anything, the oppressors.
Within the, what do you mean?
Yes.
In what sense?
Yes. Just policing, just being assholes.
Yeah, for a while until some other people took over and kind of took it very seriously. I mean, look, there's very easy. The best way of keeping a group is knowing who's outside of it, and keeping that circle smaller and smaller and smaller. I mean,
It's the most defining trait of straight edge.
Yeah.
Is the obsession with people who are not straight edge anymore.
Yeah.
Just obsessed with the dropouts.
But the thing is, I agree with you, David. We were probably one of the biggest assholes in the scene.
There were a lot of us.
Yeah, but then it kind of took a turn to the worse later on, when things really got serious.
Like what?
I mean, it wasn't smaller, like the kind of circle of what was okay and not, it became smaller and smaller and smaller until everything imploded, basically. Yeah, I mean, it became sort of a cult that outdefined everybody that did not had the same analysis on society and
Right, but that's the pattern of all left movement. I mean, like
Yeah.
it's in the
Is
Monty
this kind of at
Python
the same
movie.
time as Shelter and Hare Krishna?
no,
and everything?
way after.
No,
Way,
but
way
you know,
Because
the,
looking at
the
that
Monty
now,
Python
it's-
scene of someone, you know, they're going like we're the people's front of Galilee.
Yes,
No, we're the
yes.
Galilean people's front. Fuck them, they're
Yes.
splitters. It's like what the left has done forever, just like turn against itself.
Mm.
But the thing with whatever we were going through, partly we weren't that well read necessarily.
Yeah.
We tried, you know, but some of us were artists, just like bored out of our mind in this tiny scene where we're supposed to write stuff that would stimulate whatever, like this, you know, like we were all, you know, just trying our best to entertain these people and try to take part in this like tiny claustrophobic thing, and it made us mean, I think, just being so.
Yeah, but first the rules were very easy. You were not supposed to drink. You were supposed to be vegan. that was it.
Yeah.
And then you had to, and that's your fault. Or then you had to read some French guy, and then you were screwed basically. Sorry. Some French guy from the '60s. Yeah. No, but that was not even the start of it. Like the people that I hung out with started to really get serious into some kind of, I don't even know. It felt like it was more.
But honestly, that's the great part of it, because like there's punk scenes where everyone looks like a punk and they're into the same kind of stuff. What's funny about Umeå hardcore is that from the get-go, no one looked like a punk. Like it was all this strange. I mean, there was a lot of people in there who weren't even interested in music. You know, there was just these people who were just like, well, finally something that I can get into. You know, we can be activists and we can, you know, and it's like a sort of like in the 90s, these type of people, you know, like you're critiquing consumerism. You're skeptical about like, where is this food coming from? Like, where is this produce coming from? And we're seeing a culture these days that's like very much like we want to have like a durable, like a reasonable culture of you know, whatever we buy, like as consumers, and this is like the author there's a Swedish author from the north, Sara Lidman, and she said once that she always perceived the vegan thing from Umeå as just consumer critique, because we're one generation from the farms. I mean, my mom grew up on a farm. I don't know about your parents, but like we're just one step away from this like direct relationship to the meats, to the produce, and we're these kids just running around like, what are we eating? Where is this from? What is going on? And it was like, to a lot of people, it was such a titillating thing, so interesting. But to some of us, we were trying to make music, and it just got to this point where it started out really well, but there was too much attention, too much stuff going on, like because it's such a small place, Umeå. It's ridiculous. So certain people like Johannes, maybe me, and some, but most of the people on the screen there were not the kind of people who would have played in bands even, really. Like they were not artistic types or musician types. So certain people just became like demagogues or just like, you know, it just, and we were children. It was a very, very positive thing. It became pretty negative towards the end. There's not an end, but towards the end of that heyday, because something that becomes big has to sort of crash down. And it's hard to also, the end of it, so many of those people in that world, you know, went out into like commercial rock bands, or, you know, like became like big comedians on TV or whatever. Like it didn't stay within a punk scene. It just went in all these directions.
The screening is because of the World Environment Day, and it is really interesting to see the lunch lady hoping that vegan vegetarianism.
My old lunch lady.
That's your old lunch lady. You kind of see the quality of food that you were served in the 90s, like a disgusting vegetarian food, because and looking at it today, it's laughable seeing that how big vegetarianism and veganism has become. But talking about the politics, I mean, you and your friends, what inspiration, or did you take any inspiration from the political part of the Umeå hardcore?
Me personally, not really, but not really from Umeå politics or commitment. I think it's more global in France, in Europe, and in as much country I expect. We can continue to do like we did. So it's like for me after doing this film, I consider them like pioneers, because at their age I wasn't like that, because I was not thinking about what do I eat. I just ate that, and like David said, it's an artistic way of mind. They were creative, so when you're creative, your mind is blowing, and you begin to be curious about everything. So you're curious about what's on your plate, and what's on your plate has a list of ingredients like that, and it's just a potato. It's what's those E in letters. So the film doesn't open my mind, but that answer a question from since when people began to think of being vegetarian, of a new vegetarian, because vegetarians are from way back. But I wasn't so much intelligent at their age to be as involved. But yeah,
Your watch is talking.
Yeah, my watch.
What does it say?
Crazy. She eats meat. She's not Swedish.
What did she say? It's 8 o'clock. It's 8 o'clock.
No, I don't know.
But I have another question for you. Why is there so few women in the movie?
That's the question I asked to myself at each part of the edit. Why? I think the answer is I didn't meet a lot of girls in Umeå, and I was focused at first from making a documentary about music and all the Umeå scene. So for me there was just donuts, and now my sister, which members are part of donuts, when I saw my film quasi finished, I said, "Oh my God, there is no girl there is no sounds of women on this film." And I had a friend which made the voiceovers. I had to put a woman's voice on the film, not to equalize, but it was just there's so few girls. But maybe much girls in that scene that I know. I'm French, and I have to learn every part of the scene, and I didn't meet so much people.
I was wondering, the scene was very, as we've already concluded, very political, had very high goals. How would you say that the equality was? We had the donuts, we had other female musicians. Would you say that they were seen as equals?
It was a very chauvinist, like teenage male chauvinist world. It was probably like when you meet people from a bigger city who had like a music scene that wasn't even political in any way, it was a lot less chauvinists there as far as these things
Why did it
go.
become so chauvinist then? Especially since you had such a political...
We were just male chauvinists. You know, you don't. That's just how it was until you wised up. I mean, the Donuts. I think they were accepted. They were a good band. They were.
But did you consider them equals?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, they were great.
They're still the most underrated band from Umeå Hardcore.
Mm-hmm. Would they say they were seen as equals, you think?
I'm not sure. Like the thing is, me and David, that I'm a generation younger than him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is my experience. Yeah, I had a lot of in my group of friends, there were a lot of girls. There were a lot of girls at shows.
As we even see.
Yeah, there were more girls playing in the band than Donuts.
Mm-hmm.
But as David said, I mean, it's a macho world. It is.
It's even worse than that. I think it was even like so bad because it was such a politically conscious environment that it was even like there was like a problem. Like, why aren't there more girls playing in bands? So there was like almost like a concerted effort to like activate just like friends that were just girls who liked going to shows. So just like, shouldn't you play in a band? Because the scene would look better.
Because you
for
wanted
the
to
scene.
check off the tick the box
Yes.
of.
That's how we
Okay.
did.
Yeah, that's how the political scene worked.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that's it kind of ended with a very, very the political elite, so to say, went from the animal rights people to the anti-capitalist people to the feminist, extreme feminist people, and then it died. Don't ask me why, but that's what happened.
I don't understand.
No, exactly.
So, I mean, I'm just saying, like I said earlier,
Elaborate.
the circle got, no, the circle got smaller and smaller and smaller. So and if you, the people that could not, you had to be there.
David, do you know what he's meaning?
Yeah, you know the group of people I'm talking about, right?
Maybe from the way that I saw it, it was like there's this like political punk scene, and you just want to like do good, like, and it's sort of in the city's DNA to just be good and do good, you know, and then you're these young guys and you're sort of like weird and awkward and you're sober and you're sort of like I had a friend, this is not to make light, it should get too boring, but a friend of mine traveled to Umeå, a female friend who was in a band in the south of Sweden, and she went to Umeå for like a week in the summer of whatever, 96, 90 something, hanging out in the scene. And I was busy with rehearsing, doing something, and then as she was leaving, because she was hanging around with other people in the scene, and then I asked her, how was your trip? And she said, I was trying to fuck my way into Umeå Hardcore. It was absolutely impossible. I think that kind of answers there was an awkwardness among a lot of the guys.
That's not, well, is it really? But oh well, okay. Let's open for questions from the audience. Maybe you have some questions about this.
Yes.
Please raise your
Do you
hands.
see the women as equal? You didn't answer the question.
Me? Yeah.
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in the scene?
In the scene. I'm guessing that a lot of people, I mean, there was always talk about Donuts getting the Victory Records label D because they were an all-girl hardcore band, and not because they were a great hardcore band. I never thought that, I thought they were a great hardcore band, and I figured, of course, Victory is they were a pretty terribly profit-based enterprise within the DIY scene, so I figured that they were pretty cynical about it. But I thought that it was great. They were a great band. They were one of those bands who were a punk band before the hardcore thing happened, so they were called the Dead Donuts. And they played like punk stuff, pretty fast stuff, 7 seconds covers, stuff like that. And then when the whole, they were part of that whole movement of, whatever new hardcore was coming out of the States, we were picking up. So they decided to get serious, so they cut off the one word from their name, the Dead Donuts. They removed the dead, which in hindsight, they removed the wrong word. But they were the donuts. They were great. No, but yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions? Hands up.
Which band was your main inspiration?
Which band was your main inspiration? Do you mean Refused? Or
For
both
the-
of them?
For the main scene.
It would have to be, I think, Youth of Today, sadly, because they're sort of a tragic lot.
And do you-
Both when you're in the scene for as long as one has been now, you sort of know a lot about the people. But yeah, because they were the strange idea came from Ian Mackay, and he was basically like a Jimi Hendrix freak. And anyone that he ever met that he asked, like, who had seen Jimi Hendrix live, was like, I don't remember, I was on so many drugs. And he was like, that does not make sense to me, I'll not do drugs. But he was never messianic about it, like he never wanted anyone else to become what he was, like he was very much like his own thing. But as a generation or a couple of years passed, this other people picked it up and turned it into like this like messianic